let me introduce our next panelist. Dr. Negin Yavari is an assistant professor of history at the New School. She is chiefly interested in the history of political thought of the medieval Islamic world, and her biography of Nizam al-Mulk is forthcoming. Her current project, The Sunni-Shia Encounter, is a modern history of Muslim political thought. Dr. Yavari.
Well, I want to thank everyone who made this possible, and I'm going to follow in the ambassador's lead and disagree with what he said about George Bush's policy in Iraq, because for the past 300 years, in fact, Najaf and Karavan were Holmes' main rivals. So the pundits in the White House were completely correct, bolstering Najaf and Karavan would work to undermine Holmes. But the only problem was that after the US invasion, for the first time in the past 300 years, they've learned to love each other, and now they get along so much better than they ever did. So that, everything, the assessment was completely correct up until the invasion. And after that, everybody on both sides has played it very nice and polite and refused to criticize each other out there in the public. But so that is, that is an aside. But I think that I want to go back to the comments from my fellow panelists from the New York Times, because I think he did a very interesting thing analytically, which is to take the Iran issue and then analyze US policy and American politics. And I think that's a lesson that we may want to walk away with, right? Because, obviously knowledge is not being imparted in anybody's discussion about Iran. Hillary Clinton has nothing left to say on any issue, I think, that is actually not, unrobotic and unprogrammed. So that's a non-entity in terms of content analysis. I think it's completely a waste of time to analyze what she says, because she says it for always for an ulterior reason, and it will mean nothing since it signifies nothing. And except for Joe Biden, the rest of them have never said anything that I have found worthy of analysis, in the sense that, they say it, you take it, you write it down, you quote it, you do all sorts of things with it, but you don't analyze it, because it was really not written to be to mean anything. But I do think that what it does reveal is what's going on in America. And as the least American of any one of you sitting in this room, it's my duty to draw to your attention, what in fact is going on in the interaction between Iran and the US is very interesting, and it's the detriment of the US in the very long run. What you have in the past, and the responsibility for it, I think, falls on very different shoulders. But it obviously is a completely different world today in terms of information exchange and the availability of information. So when the NIE comes out a few weeks ago, as it did, it was analyzed on Iranian websites in almost 4 hours. It was not just analyzed in Iranian websites. Everybody knew there's a former US ambassador who doesn't, who thinks that the NIE was just, completely on the spot. It was a good thing to have it released the way that it was. And then there are 10 other ambassadors who don't, right? And that, in other words, everything that anyone could ever say to criticize President Bush, the American ambassadors say it. They don't need anybody else to do that. So that Rafsanjani, in fact, was a lot more kind in his assessment of the NIE evaluation than what we've been reading in the American press. Now, this has a tremendous effect, because America is being read not as foreigners used to read America, but as Americans read themselves. And this will obviously make a tremendous difference in the way with which we deal with America, or other countries, other interest groups, other political parties will deal with America. So that while American reporters, and not everyone in this room, of course, but American reporters will go on and on and on and talk about Sunni and Shia, and they have no understanding whatsoever of what, even forget about what doctrinal differences they have, but the slightest awareness of, where to begin to ask questions. Every time you say Sunni, Shia, Kurd, what you're saying is, I know jack blank about what I'm talking about. That's all you're saying. But we say it all the time, and we're going to keep on saying it, because of course there is no willingness to learn, and there's no willingness to take to begin to answer questions that are actually productive. And I say there's no willingness because there is no willingness as evidenced in what comes out in the American press compared to what comes out in European presses. So that, you know, if other white people can learn to ask good questions about dark people, everybody can. And so that's a serious issue. And that will have a serious effect on the way in which America is perceived in the world. I mean, what the Iranian Revolution has done, whether you like it or not, is completely inconsequential. What it has done is to create a modern country. Iran is the only modern state in the Middle East. The state apparatus of the Arab countries are a joke compared to the Iranian power, the Iranian ideology, and the Iranian infrastructure for influencing political discourse and ideological change. And that is exactly what, you know, political currents, long-term historical trends are made of. They're not made of, you know, the conservatives and the extremists. Every single American author, I mean, not my advisor, of course, he's different. But the vast majority of what we read in America about the vocabulary which we need to have at the tip of our hands, of our fingers, to understand, to be able to classify Iranian political camps, for instance. Just to take a very, very basic example. So until the current administration in Iran came to power, the judiciary was considered to be like the evil part of Iran where all the hardline mullahs live. The judiciary now, with the same head as 2003, is in fact the one organ of the Iranian government that is standing up to radical measures that are being suggested by President Ahmadinejad. It's the same Ayatollah Shahroudi. He's been there for a long, long time. And if you were going to look at Iranian politics now, he would be completely in the liberal, pro-reform, lefty side of the spectrum. Now, what that does, the interesting thing about the US media, though, is that when they see that, what they do is to skip over it. I mean, there is no, in the same, I mean, so that George Bush and what comes out of the president's, you know, establishment is not very different from what's coming out of US media. I mean, what you had 20, 40 years ago is not what you have today. And this is true about every profession that deals with other cultures, major areas of whatever in this country. We have those debates all the time in the universities. When we know, what do we know? How do we do class? How do we do race? How do we do difference? These are issues that are very pervasive, and they will have more of a direct effect and a more visible consequence on Americans standing in the world than they did 50 years ago. So that, if US diplomats and if the US foreign policy establishment is forced to get up and say, you know what, it's not about democracy, because it's easy to prove it's not about democracy, right? Like, Blackwater is not exactly recreating Athens in the 21st century. It's so easy to do that. You do that, and the answer can be that, well, this is our national interest. You could say that, but that's not a good position. It's not a fortuitous position for America to be in. People have done that in the past, right? We've seen the fate of the Soviet Union. So that in fact, I think that the color revolution that the government and Washington and the think tanks, which are just mushrooming all over the place, are fostering is more in America. It's going to be much more consequential in America than it is abroad. When you look at the divide between the people who are writing books and reading about the Middle East and actually, like learning Arabic, it takes a long, long time. Persian is much better. It's got, it's got a good Indo-European grammar structure. You should try it. But, and doing all the hard work, these are not the people who are being voiced in American news summaries, in American news, the process of the production of, daily news on Iran. So that a reporter who asks, there are many, many good reporters, but they just don't know how to ask questions that are actually meaningful. So that, what we are really doing is allowing our candidates, the presidential candidates, to say what they want, and they're getting away with it because we don't have the conceptual apparatus to actually criticize and analyze the ramifications of what they are saying and what those things mean.